So, thank you for joining us. I was just part of a panel discussion on fatherhood, and it was just for men. So it was a men's retreat called Mantra. M-A-N were in capital letters. Mantra, like mantra, but the word man was emphasized. Like Michael Jackson did an album called History, but the his was colored in, so it looked like his story instead of history. So the mantra became mantra. It was all men, I guess there were 100 participants for an online retreat, and it was for the Hare Krishna movement, so it was for devotees. And I was part of a panel discussion on fatherhood. And one of the things that I noticed, and I expected it, so I walked into the meeting with a hypothesis about how things were going to go down. And then the actual meeting did confirm my hypothesis. I thought that we were probably going to end up having a discussion on parenthood. And that most of the advice that would be given would be advice that was useful for both men and women. Now, if you were to say, well, let's just have a group of only men, but let's meet together to talk about parenthood, I think that's valuable. And it's valuable because sometimes if you want to talk about something like addiction or some difficulty you're having in life, you may choose to only want to talk about it with people of your sex. You may only want to talk to men because, it's a very common thing in Alcoholics Anonymous or 12-step meetings that you go to what's called a stag meeting. It's all men or all women. And the reason is because you're going to be vulnerable and talk about stuff. You prefer not to have gender politics play into it. And so there's a bunch of pretty girls while you're trying to talk gut-wrenchingly honestly about your struggles in life, you may find you're not being honest enough because there's women in the room. If you're dating those women or something like that, it might complicate matters. So sometimes, although people are dealing with what are really androgynous issues which are human issues which are equally true for male and for women, they may choose to discuss them just with other men because there's some value in being able to talk honestly, and you feel you can be more honest, amidst people of your gender, of your sex. I'm going to use the term gender and sex as synonymous. That's not so popular these days. A lot of times people like to refer to gender as being a social construct. But for the purpose of this discussion, I'm going to use the term gender and sex as synonymous. And I think it's kind of gender is less biological and chromosomal. Gender is more biological and chromosomal than something, let's say, like race. But we have no problem saying, let's have a discussion amongst black people, let's have a discussion amongst Mexican people, let's have a discussion amongst Asian people. Those things are acceptable, but those things are way less able to be demonstrated chromosomally and genetically than the distinction between the sexes, which is very basic. And so when people try to argue that gender is a social construct, I would argue that gender is chromosomal. And there may be some other aspects to it, but that's at the core. Gender becomes chromosomal. There may be people who feel non-binary, and I think that's reasonable, just as people may feel that they were born the wrong race. They might say, I was born in a black person's family, but I feel like I'm white. But I think there was a woman in Washington who was white, and she she lived as a black woman and joined the NAACP, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. She became a high-ranking member, but then they found out that she was actually white and they kicked her out. And she tried to argue that, her heart was black, but people didn't buy it. And so I think if you want to make the argument that gender is just what you identify with, you would also have to allow for people to identify as being taller than they actually were. They'd be able to put whatever height they wanted to on their driver's license. They'd have to be able to put whatever race they wanted to on their driver's license. But we don't permit such things. And I think if you don't permit such things, you have a tough argument to make that gender somehow is unique and it's being totally arbitrary and based on somebody's personal feelings, whereas these other things are understood to be representative of actual facts, of genetic facts, of chromosomal facts. I use the term gender and sex as equivalent. Now, if somebody wants to be referred to in non-binary language, I think that's a personal preference, and I'm happy to accommodate them. But I don't feel that gender is evil by its very existence. I don't think that the more non-binary we are in our language, the better off we are. I think that when you look at the world, you find that male and female as basic typologies, that these things are properly basic and they're ubiquitous. We find them all over the world, in plants and animals, everywhere you look. You find both male and female sexes as being kind of like the template for how the world proceeds. And given that I believe that the world comes from a divine source, then it seems to me to be quite natural to assume that those male and female qualities also exist within that divine source. Therefore, they're not something to be run away from. They're something to be honored. And in some ways, by looking at ourselves, by noticing that we're conscious, we can understand our source must be conscious. By seeing that, masculine and feminine exist as basic typologies in this world, not as a perversion of them, but as a basic typology, then to try to argue that the source of those things is genderless seems to me to be a fundamentally flawed bit of philosophizing. So I'm not afraid of gender, and if people want to refer to themselves in non-binary language, I'm comfortable with that. If they want me to refer to that based on the idea that people get to choose what name you call them by, they can choose their pronouns as well, and I'm real comfortable with that. But it doesn't mean that the world is not heavily binary. And it doesn't necessarily mean that transcending that binary world is necessarily the way to go. That that's somehow that's the thing to do, is to ignore the data we have here. That the world is sexed. And I think we can manage to stop exploiting other people without denying the diversity that actually exists. And I think we can even accommodate transgender people or non-binary asexual people or genderqueer people and everything else within a world which is 99%, 99.9% binary. Okay. You find Krishna far from running away from gendered language in the Gita. He uses it. And there is like a neutered language. There's a neuter case in Sanskrit, not male or female. And that is used to describe Brahman. Tat Brahman, that Brahman. And so you do find a neutral gender. The neutral gendered language exists in Sanskrit, and you find it's used to describe Brahman. It's used to describe Krishna in some cases. But Krishna also uses masculine and feminine language to describe himself. Here's a typical example. Mama yonir mohat Brahma. The great Brahman is my womb. Tasmin garbam dadam yaham. And in it I place the seed. So Krishna identifies himself with the yoni, with the womb, and he also identifies himself with the phallus, with the male genitalia. Mama yoni mahat brahma. My womb is the great Brahman, and in it I place the seed. So Krishna's really making an argument here that he's hermaphroditic, that he's androgynous, that he has both male qualities, as well as the jin here is for gyne, which means feminine. And so he's both androgenic and gynogenic simultaneously. In my womb I place the seed. Sambhava sarvabhutanam tato bhavati bharat. And from that, all living beings are created. All living beings are born from that. The total material substance called Brahman is the source of birth, and it is that Brahman that I impregnate, making possible the birth of all living beings. So that the source of birth is his Prabhupada's translation of I guess in that Brahman, he kind of skips over the translating of Brahman, Mama Yoni. He skips over rendering it here. And then the next verse says again, Aham bija pradapita. I am the seed-giving father. Krishna identifies himself as the Mata, the mother, and the Pitta, the father of the universe. Pitta hamasya jagato mata. I'm the father of the universe and the mother. So Krishna does not shy away from gendered language. He's unafraid. And what is amazing about the Gita is he uses both male and female terms to describe himself. You find this expressed in Hinduism, Sita Ram and Lakshmi Narayan and Radha Krishna. You find that there's generally a proper conception of divinity includes both a male as well as a female component. But we don't run away from that. We see that the source of the world, which has male and female in it, also possesses those things. And so instead of having to run away, we can actually celebrate the masculinity and the femininity of the divine. So I was part of this discussion on fatherhood and this panel discussion. And I had an idea, a hypothesis about how it was going to go. And in fact, it did go that way. Everybody just talked about good parental advice. None of the advice was specific to being a father. Therefore, what they should have called the discussion was good parenting. And I was chosen because I have 6 children. Good parenting. And it's a men's discussion on good parenting. Because if the advice given was advice on how to be a good human, how to be a good parent, that would be equally applicable to a woman, to a mother, then it's not about fatherhood. It's about parenthood. And the term fatherhood is a misnomer because it's too specific. And they should have picked a more generic term, parenthood. Now, why would a bunch of men get around to talk about being parents? For the reasons I mentioned, people go to a stag meeting, group counseling meeting. They want to be with other people like them that they can relate to, and that provides them with a better platform to be vulnerable. But the title of the lecture was about fatherhood, not parenthood. And that was the problem. So they mistitled it. And I, of course, as soon as I was introduced, I made mention of this. I said, all your advice thus far is about being a good parent. But it's not about being a good parent. It's about being a good father. And so we should be looking for things that are specific to being a father, that are not common with mothers. Can you follow? And so and of course, being a father means being male. So really, to say what it means to be a good father is intimately and inexorably linked to what it means to be a good male. Being a good parent may be asexual to some extent. Of course, only really if your kids are asexual or androgynous and don't have any particular gender. Otherwise, you would have to, as part of being a parent to those kids who are in a particular gender, model what those gender norms are, unless gender norms are all fallen by the wayside. Again, in which case we wouldn't have a discussion on fatherhood. We would have a discussion on parenting. So, yeah, I tried, I did it with them there. I said, what does it mean to be a man? That's not the same as being a woman. There's classical things like honor, integrity, but are those really male qualities? Definitely not. I know women with tons of integrity. I know men with very little. I do not see that men fundamentally have more integrity or intelligence or honor or discipline than women do. Therefore, these could not be the qualities, or skill or mastery or any of the classic qualities given by the men's movement for what it means to be a man. There's only one thing I can think of that makes a man that's different than a woman. You know what it is? It's strength. And I don't mean spiritual strength, and I don't mean mental strength. I mean physical, brute strength. That is how men, specifically upper body strength, but strength generally conceived, brute strength. That's why women can't compete with men in sports. The only sports they can compete with men in, where they perform equally well with men, is in shooting a rifle or equestrian events, where largely physicality isn't a factor. But in other sports, including long-distance swimming, I saw some misinformation about long-distance swimming. Women have smaller shoulders, and therefore it makes them glide through the water better. But they weren't comparing apples to apples. The women and the men weren't competing in the same events, or it was an amateur level which was being compared, not an Olympic level, where the men outperform the women, and the women have shorter races. So there are a couple of sports. Gymnastics for women is much more about flexibility. For men, it's much more about power. That's why they don't even compete in the same events. The men do the rings. The women don't do the rings. If I'm remembering correctly. Yeah. And so, yeah, men are stronger than women. It almost sounds like I'm not allowed to say that, especially because of the way the world is today. But that is a fact. Men are physically, brutally stronger than women, which means that men are more dangerous and violent than women are. Now, we have ways of equalizing this. We can use weapons to equalize this. And then a woman becomes more dangerous than any unarmed man instantly with a gun. But there's a problem with that, because when people have guns who are not physically imposing, and like a police officer, for instance, and they get themselves into a situation with a criminal or a potential criminal where they can't overpower that person because the person is bigger and stronger than they are, then what do? They pull out their gun as an equalizer, and once they do that, they've now introduced deadly force, lethal force, and then if the person continues to be aggressive, they have no choice but to shoot them, and now you have police officers shooting people unnecessarily because they can't physically overpower them. When they got rid of chokeholds amongst police officers, I think it's a terrible idea. I think they should make chokehold training mandatory for police officers so they know how to properly apply them so they can use them, because chokeholds are a great equalizer, because you take hold of somebody's neck, it's the most vulnerable part of their body, and it controls the entire body because you now control their head and their spine. But if you don't know how to use them, then you might injure somebody. But if you outlaw them, now you can't nullify somebody without killing them, and then you have to pull out a gun, and now you're back to ground zero again where you're hurting people. So, I think that what makes men is strength. And strength really means a greater capacity for violence. And that makes men dangerous. And dangerous is not a bad thing. Dangerous to your enemies is an asset to your tribe. If a man is viewed as dangerous, then the people who are in his team are protected. His danger makes him able to give protection. Now, there are other ways, if somebody's weak, they can become rich and they can give protection based on that. They can become really smart and give protection based on that. But I'm unwilling to concede that women don't have equal rights to that. And so if we're going to distill it down to like the essence of fatherhood that's specific to fatherhood, that's not common with motherhood, I can't think of anything besides strength that women don't have an equal share in. And what is it that makes a woman a woman? It's the fact that she carries a child and lactates. Therefore, it's nurturing. A woman nurtures. It's the essence of being a woman is to be nurturing. The essence of being a man is to be strong. To a large extent, we need to become androgynous as devotees. We need to cultivate both masculine and feminine qualities the same way Krishna has both qualities. Prabhupada one time spoke of a devotee as having the courage of an Englishman. English soldiers were famous for their courage, and the heart of a Bengali mother, who were famous for being very motherly. So Prabhupada was saying a devotee has both those qualities. And certainly Prabhupada was very motherly, as well as very fatherly. And he was not particularly physically impressive. But he did physically protect his disciples. One time, some of his female disciples were dancing at a kirtan event in India, and some low-class men started to get close to them, like they wanted to dance with them. And Prabhupada took his kartals he was using, he started swinging them violently at the men's heads, and they backed off. And then Prabhupada went back to doing kirtan, making it clear he wasn't going to let those people assault his female disciples. So, as you get older in life, to some extent you may transcend gender. You may, women go through menopause, their estrogen levels drop to practically nil. Men's testosterone levels usually don't drop to nil, but they drop down substantially. Women become so androgynous they can't give birth anymore. The very thing that makes them a woman is no longer there. Therefore, they have to transcend that. And you find older women tend to look less feminine. It's not just old age. It's a lack of estrogen. Sometimes a married couple start to look like each other. Yeah, because the guy becomes more feminine and less masculine, and the woman becomes less feminine, and therefore they merge together and they come closer together with one another. So there's nothing wrong with that. It happens naturally, but it certainly doesn't happen early on in life. And if you want to train your children how to go through puberty, then you need to train them to deal with and not ignore the very powerful sex hormones that course through their veins. And I mean, think about how powerful they are. They transform. When you look at small children, they look more or less androgynous. You can dress them interchangeably and they look the same. But the strong jawline, the barrel chest, the big upper body, the large hips of a woman, the bosom, all these things, that's how powerful these sex hormones are. They transform you entirely. If you want to be a good parent and you have children who are in one of these two genders and you don't understand them and you haven't accepted them and you haven't learned to harness them and make them work, what are you going to teach your kids? You can only teach them androgyny or asexuality because you yourself have no experience with anything else. The essence of being a man, the essence of being a father is being a man. The essence, and then some. The essence of being a man is strength. Strength makes you dangerous. Strength is not necessarily a weakness. Strength is something that can be cultivated. Strength is the capacity for violence. The capacity for violence is the capacity to protect. Therefore, the essence of fatherhood is to protect. And I don't mean in some abstract sense, because women have equal rights to that. I mean physically protect. And the essence of motherhood is to be nurturing. And I don't mean in some abstract sense because men have equal rights to that. I mean literally to nurture, to lactate, to carry a child, to care for them. In many ways, as we pursue Krishna consciousness, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is an androgynous deity. He's Krishna with the mood and sentiments of Radharani. We worshipped our deity as both male and female. Radha Krishna, Sita Ram, Gaur Gadadhar for that matter. There's always a feminine deity. Jagannath Baladev and Subhadra. There's always a feminine deity. There's always a feminine moiety, a feminine half, a feminine part, an indispensable feminine part in the Hindu pantheon. We don't have the Christian kind of exclusively masculine deity for the most part in most iterations of Christianity. We don't have that within our tribe. And you see Krishna like making use of my womb. I'm the seed-giving father. I'm the mother. I'm the father. You see him. And also referring to himself in the neuter gender. Freely. And so I think in our hearts to some extent, we embrace more of an androgynous ideal. But that doesn't mean our body is supposed to ideally be androgynous. Our body may quite neatly fit into one of the two genders. And even being androgynous doesn't indicate asexuality or being neutered. It rather indicates the presence of both masculine and feminine qualities. And I think it's important for fathers to cultivate masculinity so they can bequeath it to their children, so they can teach it to their children, so the capacity for violence isn't misused, so it's used properly to protect instead of to exploit. And pretending it doesn't exist doesn't help anybody, because it does exist, and if you don't honor it and you don't teach how to deal with it, it's going to end up becoming a problem for you later on in life. And you see that. You know, people who haven't been trained, then they get trained by TV and what it means to be a man, or they get trained by their peers and what it means, and they don't have nearly the insight that they would have if they were trained by their elders. And so, of course, I spoke this, to 100+ devotees, and I think nobody really challenged me on it, but I definitely think it shook people up because people do not think in this way. There's a zeitgeist, cultural norm in these times that androgyny is what it's all about. And you're a human, not male or female. And that's really the essence of what you are. And even to cultivate, especially masculinity, is fundamentally bad. I would argue it's the inability or the lack of cultivating masculinity properly that is the cause of all the problems that we get from men. Strength is not a weakness. Unbridled strength is a weakness. Strength used to protect is not a weakness. Strength used to exploit is. We need to teach people how to deal with this. Otherwise, it's like never teaching your kid what it's like to go through puberty, and all of a sudden they have all these desires and feelings, and you've trained them in no way, shape, or form how to contend with them and deal with them and navigate them, and they wind up hurting themselves and other people. I contributed this, that by being a man, by being masculine, or by being feminine, you're then able to teach your children this. And that's going to have some utility to them, at least in their life when they go through puberty, at least in their life when they're just getting going. Maybe as we get older, we all tend towards androgyny, and we all have to ultimately refine a perfect balance of those qualities. But that's not always the order of the day. That's not always the case. Weak men, incapable of giving protection, are a problem. Anyway, these are some thoughts I had just around the panel discussion I was a part of. I appreciate parenting. I appreciate good parental advice. I appreciate good parental advice spoken of in a group of just women, or good parental advice spoken of in just a group of men, because sometimes there's value in just meeting with people of your own gender. It's just there's like one less thing to contend with. There's one less element to juggle. But I think there is something to fatherhood. And I don't think it's in any more that you're the breadwinner. I think women can make just as much money. I don't think it's any more that you are the caregiver. Men can also stay at home and be homemakers. I don't think it's intelligence. Although men traditionally are more geared towards engineering type activities, STEM, science, technology, and engineering and mechanics, machines. I can't remember what the M stands for. It's one of those two. There is some evidence for that. There is the Norwegian gender equity paradox, which is that 90% of engineers are men and 90% of nurses are women. And they found that it's based on testosterone levels in the amniotic fluid, and that these things have massive effects on a child's interest in systems and machines versus interest in facial recognition and emotions. And Norway, which was voted the most gender equal country in the world, still 90% of their engineers are men and 90% of their nurses are women. And they've been trying to change that for decades. And they can't. Somehow, no matter what they do or how they teach it, they cannot get more than about 10% of women to become engineers and more than about 10% of men to become nurses. Because there are, in addition to being some physical differences, there's also some mental differences that are very easy to see, and studies substantiate this. Women perform better in language arts. Excuse me. Now I'm getting edgy, so I'm getting unmiked. Women perform better at language, men are better at math. This is found in westernized world as well as in older societies. But separate from that, separate from me getting into that, I think there's value in teaching good parenting. I think there's value in teaching good parenting amongst men or amongst women for the reasons I mentioned. I also think there's value in teaching what it means to be a mother. And I think there's value in teaching what it means to be a father. And the essence of those things, as far as I could see, where they diverge, is that women nurture and men protect. No matter how nurturing a man gets, he does not carry a child. He does not birth a child. He does not lactate on his own. And women, with a few exceptions of course, lack the upper body strength that men do. And they don't have the capability of violence, brutal violence, and where strength is a factor that men do. And so men should cultivate strength, along with a whole host of androgynous virtues. And women should cultivate nurturing, along with a whole host of androgynous virtues. And men can even cultivate nurturing, and women can even cultivate strength. There's nothing wrong with that. But we should understand that our bodies were differently composed, and that these differences are what makes it different to be a father than a mother. If you want to use that terminology, if you want to honor that terminology, if you want to see value in that terminology, you have to ask yourself these kind of questions. And you find Krishna not shying away from that towards an androgynous language, or towards a neutered language rather. But Krishna freely makes use of both masculine, fully masculine, seed-giving father. Fully feminine, my womb. Krishna literally says he's the mother of the universe. He literally says he's the father of the universe. He does not run away from the sexes. He actually claims both of them. And I think that's powerful. I think it's in some ways like a post-feminist thing. Feminism went through a few different times. There was the feminism of the women's suffrage movement where women were fighting for the right to vote. Then there was another transformation that took place in the 40s when men went to World War II and women were forced to really enter the workplace. That was like the Rosie Riveter movement. Then the second like real full wave of feminism hit in the 60s with the civil rights movement, which really took off for women in the 70s and such. It was much more along racial lines in the 60s initially, but it was at least the bedrock of it was there. And then there was this sort of third wave of feminism came about in the 80s. And women of different ethnicities, of different flavors and shapes and sizes, decided that they largely did not want white, lesbian women of an upper middle class background with a college education telling them what it meant to be a woman. And that they wanted to be ultra feminine, and that was their way of being empowered. That was okay. And black feminism was different than Mexican feminism. That was okay also. And so that was the third wave of feminism. Which is like not everything fits into one shape or size. And I think to some extent it might be time for like a fourth wave. It might have already been a fourth wave I'm just unaware of, but it might be time for almost like a post-feminist discussion where people learn how to not throw out the baby with the bathwater. And they learn how to honor what is masculine along with what is feminine, and see those things as being sacred and being maybe not the exclusive property of each sex, but certainly of being the natural area where each sex excels. That women excel at being nurturers, that men excel at being protectors, and that there's nothing wrong with that. That's just our biology. If you look at social mammals, they follow these standards. And we may be able to subvert them to some extent, like I said, with weapons or with a police force, so that we can feel free to live in a more androgenized human way. But I think there's something that you lose. Because you get these boys or girls with a ton of estrogen or testosterone, and you got no way to tell them what to do with it. You got no way to tell them what it was put there for. It's almost like your appendix. It becomes this useless, organ that we don't even know what it's there for. You know what I mean? It becomes this like inelegant organ that you don't even know what to do with. And it's almost like we should just, remove every child's appendix at birth because there's no value to it. We do that already when we circumcise children. We think the foreskin has no value, and so we maim children. We horribly maim children unnecessarily because we just determined, this has no value to you. They made an argument for the appendix as well. There's just no value to it. So just remove it so it never bursts, never becomes inflamed. You don't have to worry about it because you seem to be able to live without it quite all right. It doesn't seem to do anything for people. We don't know what it does. There's all sorts of theories about what it might have done. It's like an old organ that had some utility at one point, but it's no longer required for human beings. That starts to become like what the deal is with testosterone and estrogen. Amazingly, and I think removing those things and not being able to contend with them in some ways is a delusion. It's an inability to properly contend with and deal with and own what's in the world. And it leads to an attenuated or a neutered conception of divinity, a crippled notion of divinity. Because you have this thing in this world, the distinction between male and female, which is so ubiquitous, it's so all-pervasive. It's almost like the fundamental taxonomy, categorization of the world. And you have no idea what to do with it. And now it's like the world was an accident that we have to fix. You follow? Our basic nature is faulty. God made us wrong. It's almost the same flaw as like we were born with a mortal sin. It ultimately reflects poorly on the deity that made us. with that immortal sin. This other way of viewing things, it celebrates, it seems more archaic, it seems less informed, but it's actually way more progressive. It's post-feminist. It actually has the ability to celebrate masculinity without leading to exploitation. Femininity without leading to selfishness. Or maybe without leading to like unhealthy selflessness. Nurturing to the point of ignoring yourself. And so obviously there's a downside to everything. You got to figure out a way to remove the negative while accentuating the positive and not throw out the baby with the bathwater. I don't think that's really such an impossible thing to do. I think we went wrong somewhere and we ran away from a fundamental reality in this world. And we embraced, without good reason, a neutered conception of perfection. And, you know, it's like buyer beware. It's like you start removing appendixes or you start removing foreskins. There's ramifications of that. There's problems associated with that. You start embracing an androgynous ideal or a neutered ideal. They've done studies that women prefer masculine men when it comes time to making a baby during the period of ovulation. The study is replicable and it's been replicated. They show women a bunch of photos of men, ask them to rate their attractiveness. When the women are not ovulating, they rate things more where men with feminine features are considered to be more attractive. And then when they're ovulating, they look at the same set of photos and they rate the men with the masculine features more attractive. Well, if you extinguish your masculine features, then you become unattractive to your mate because you lack the fundamental thing that like makes you worth connecting with. And so ultimately a good man should be able to be more feminine and empathetic and nurturing. And then also he should be able to do both, wear both hats. And there's a completeness there. If we embrace this human ideal without acknowledging what's right in front of us, what's right in front of our face, namely the basic inherent nature of male and female in this world, that's a problem. Men start to think that the good thing is to extinguish the very thing that makes them who they are, and it's like almost like they teach their children some form of self-hatred and a lack of self-acceptance. It's almost like if you had a gay child who viscerally, basically, fundamentally was gay and you tried to teach them that was wrong, they should ignore that and cultivate something else. We would think such a thing was horrible, but yet that's what we do, and we teach an androgenized version of what it means to be a man. And so I think we're almost ready for a fourth wave or a fifth wave, whatever wave we're on, which is kind of a post-feminist wave where you actually learn to appreciate transcendent qualities, human qualities, and celebrate the special things that men are gifted with and the special things that women are gifted with. You don't have to run from that. You can still see equal rights. You can still treat people equally. You can still avoid exploitation without having to throw out what makes men men. This is what I contribute. I only had like a couple minutes at a time, so I couldn't give my full speech because I was just part of a panel discussion and I was being lobbed questions about generic parenting by the organizers. So they were asking generic questions about parenting, how many kids should you have, and what's the most important thing about being a parent, and how do you give your kids Krishna conscious growing up? But I mean, women can answer this question as well as men can. So why are we having a conversation on fatherhood if those are your questions? And so I took my contrarian position like I always do, and This essentially is what I said, but now I got to say it all at once instead of just a little piece at a time, while having to deflect irrelevant questions. Okay, I've said my piece. You guys want to comment? I'd like some feedback. Nobody? Gopal, you want to say something? Is that your hand up? Are you raising your hand? Is that what's going on?
Yes, Prabhu. Can you hear me?
I can hear you perfectly. What's up?
I really enjoyed this presentation, this class you gave. Growing up, I grew up with just my mother, and I grew up in a very traditional Croatian family and community. So, I grew up with these ideas of, to be a man, you have to drink alcohol. To be a man, you need to have, this machismo and bravado. And I never jived with that. But it was all I had available. And so as I kind of moved through puberty and into early adulthood, that was the thing that I had, and that was the thing I used. I abused alcohol. I kind of tried to always walk around with a puffed up chest. And I quickly learned that, that was just something I was mimicking. And I think a big reason why I ultimately came into Bhakti was when I met Raghunath years back. I met somebody who was had manliness, but he also had compassion and kindness, and these other traits I was never taught were valuable for a man. So everything that you brought up today, it really sunk in with me, and I really appreciate you bringing it up.
It's funny. It's like using words like manliness or masculine. It's almost like they're bad words. Like you're not supposed to say them in today's society. It's so bizarre. It's actually like a disturbing trend that being male is all of a sudden like a bad thing, and it's almost like linked fundamentally to being exploitative. Matriarchy isn't a bad word, but patriarchy, it's just like the worst word in the world in feminist discussions. But matriarchy is beautiful. It's like something passed on from a mother to a daughter. Like, what a beautiful concept. But patriarchy, from patri, which means father, which is, I think, it's probably from Sanskrit, pati, is somehow a bad term. And yeah, if we don't learn what it means to be men, how to be strong without being exploitative, if we don't master that art, then our children will learn what it means to be a man from a TV show. They'll learn it from a TV show or from some other boys. And as elders, we have a responsibility to set a proper example. And usually that means we have to become a better version of ourselves. And so, we need to do this for the next generation. So they'll grow up with a proper conception. Additionally, it's important to learn to be comfortable with who you are. And so I don't think that all men are going to be barrel-chested. I'm not barrel-chested. I don't think that all men are going to be 6'4". I'm not 6'4". We're ready. I don't think that it's necessary for all men to be some kind of behemoths or something like that. I think there's room for different types of men and men with different sets of qualities. But this idea that I'm a man, I got to cultivate strength so I can do violence, so I can protect those people, so my children will grow up feeling like I can protect them. I don't think that's wrong. And I think that's almost like the universal dharma of men. And that men in that sense are all kshatriyas because they protect from danger. Parents protect from danger. It's not that there's a professional class of lawyers and when there's violence, all men are supposed to cower and just call the police and sit in the corner. It's not the way it's supposed to work. We're supposed to rise up. We're the first line of defense for our family. Our family should have that confidence that we are the first line of defense, that we can protect them. And it doesn't mean that everybody's going to be a world-class fighter or something like that. But it does mean we should all put time into that. And we should cultivate it because it's part of who we are. It's part of our legacy. It's part of what our forefathers did and what our children will do to protect society. And in that sense, we participate in something greater than ourselves. It might not be transcendental, but you can do it whether you're 5'4" or 6'4". You can do it whether you weigh $125 soaking wet or 275 dry as a bone. But we need to cultivate that and teach our children it's okay to cultivate that so we can pass on the essence of fatherhood, the essence of masculinity to the next generation. And they'll blend it together based on their physiology, based on their mentality. They'll blend it together nicely. But this idea that a neutered male, a castrated male, what was a eunuch, is somehow or other the ideal. It's not the case. And women don't even like such men. Women don't even want to make children with such men. They might prefer them if they were abused because it's non-threatening to them or something like that. But when push comes to shove, they don't even want to procreate with people like that. That was me making 2 points in response to everything you say. You want to comment on what I've said, Prabhuji?
No, Prabhu. Thank you so much.
Okay. Thank you. I appreciate your comments very much. I appreciate you sharing a little bit of your story. I appreciate it very much. More thoughts from anybody? Yeah, make it loud.
Prabhu?
Yeah? Go ahead.
No, are you talking to someone else?
Yeah, go ahead, Shri. You're good.
Thank you for this class. It's been very helpful for me, and it goes in line exactly with one of the sessions I had this week, where I had a 12 or so year old boy who felt really ashamed and guilty and felt like he sobbed and thought there was something wrong with him because he has been getting mad lately, and when he gets mad, he'll throw his video game controller or he'll punch something, and he has all sisters, and he thinks that it's wrong and there's something bad. And so I brought his mom in to talk about how the normalcy of it, and this has helped me a lot to ensure this will be a recurring theme. And I did right in line with the fact that many people try to push down what's so naturally, literally in our DNA or our biology. So
the getting angry thing is there for both men and women. Higher estrogen levels, which actually, when you go through puberty, your estrogen levels initially get raised. It's a correlate to testosterone levels getting raised. There's an aromatization of estrogen, and that's linked to getting angry. And you see this. There's gynomastitis or something like that. I can't remember what the exact term is, but it's where usually in adolescence, a boy will develop a little bit of almost like a breast, and it usually works itself out within a couple of years as their estrogen levels get regulated, and so the idea of getting too angry and stuff like that and freaking out is actually common to both genders during puberty. And, Prabhupada was talking to one of his disciples who was saying he was having a hard time dealing with lust. And Prabhupada got down from his asana and did a push-up at the age of 73 and said, do this every day and it will help you. So this idea that cultivating strength actually helps you to deal with lust. And usually when kids get angry around that age, especially boys around that age, they start masturbating, because they get this anger and it overtakes them and they don't know what to do with it. And so teaching people about anger, teaching people about this incredible influx of energy, how to hone it, how to use it in a positive way, how to exercise, how to therefore be able to control your lust. These things are incredibly valuable to everybody, and also to boys. And of course, although I gave this class, you know, a little bit around fatherhood, a little bit of a focus on boys and fatherhood, the same class could just as easily have been given with a little bit of a focus on women and what those specific things are that make women special, and exploring the idea of nurturing as being a fundamental, you know, female quality. And I'm, you know, honestly celebrating pubescence. In the Waldorf school system, when a woman menstruates for the first time, when a girl menstruates, really that's the time they become a woman. I mean, if you look at, like, you know, the bat mitzvah that you went through at the age of 12 or 13, I think, sometimes in Reformed Judaism, the bat mitzvah is the rite of passage to womanhood, which is specific, like it's when menstruation occurs. It's there in the quinceañera of in Latin culture. It's really the whole debutante culture is based on the same idea, and cotillion and all that stuff people do in the higher echelons of society. And we even have it with Chanakya, who said that you should, you know, at the age of 15 become like a friend to your child. This idea of acknowledging as people move. So in the Waldorf school system, the Steiner Waldorf school system, kind of an avant-garde German way of educating children, they celebrate when a woman menstruates for the first time, when a girl menstruates for the first time, as a passage, a rite to passage. And the women of the tribe, of the community, get together and they have a special time together, and they teach her, you know, things which are normally done by a parent, by a mother, but they do it as a tribe amongst the women. And I think that idea of celebrating these things, so they're not viewed as something evil or wrong or bad, but they're celebrated. I think this is really powerful, and it's much healthier. It's a much more holistic way of viewing the world, and it leaves people able to integrate all aspects of themselves. And so then that physical culture for boys is everything, but also for girls. Same thing is there for women too. But that cultivation of strength training does amazing things for young men when on that cusp of puberty and the move from childhood to adulthood. It's such a valuable thing to do. And it helps them grow to their full potential as well. It helps them grow their full potential. Okay, and then we got room for one more. Kat's going to say something now.
It was a really great class, Prabhu. I love your ability to disrupt groupthink sometimes and move everyone's focus to the essence of a certain topic. And this topic is so important, and we often, or always it seems, in our culture nowadays, overlook these two fundamental aspects of human life. And as someone who wants to be a father soon, hopefully, it really gives me a simple roadmap on how to treat a daughter or a son, and how to look at my own masculinity. And so it was super helpful. And
thank you. It's a real nice compliment. Yeah, I wanted to get to the essence of what was being discussed and not just skirt the issue and just, like whitewash it and, just speak in platitudes that weren't specific to fatherhood, which is fundamentally related to masculinity, which is fundamentally related to manhood, which is fundamentally related to strength and violence and the ability to harness these things as a force for good, for the protection of, of your tribe, for the protection of your people, of your family. And I think there's a dearth of it. I tried to hone in on it, and I appreciate what you said. It's nice. And we need to prep for this stuff so we can be good parents, so we can be good fathers, so we can be good mothers, so our children can become good fathers and mothers, so they're not left figuring it all out for themselves with us falling by the wayside because of some misunderstanding of gender politics and just going with the flow and not being willing to step outside and disrupt the groupthink. Yeah, this is like it's a call to action for us to be our best selves, and to master this stuff so we can pass on to the next generation. All right, good. Let's call it. Thank you so much. Hare Krishna.